I'll just close the front of the camera, we don't need that open. Here is our film take-up spool. I'll just sit that on there. Just a round hole at the bottom of the take-up spool. At the top of the take-up spool there's a slot that engages the film advance shaft here. So I'll get that engaged in the spool. Like that. There's 3 screws that hold this in position. Get one started. Now I'll let you see what I'm doing instead of just looking at my fingers. Check that shaft rotates, it does. Tighten up the screws. Check that it still rotates, and it does. Now the sprocket shaft. The sprocket shaft had 2 washers from memory. Here's our sprocket. Here's the roller. And there were 2 tiny screws. And I haven't even lost them yet. So, a bit of lubrication. Well, in the bottom of the body, the hole down here that shaft runs into, I'm going to put a smear of synthetic grease in there. We can't really get at that very easily afterwards. And I'll apply some into the body at the top here too. From the top, feed in the shaft. Then we have 2 washers, 2 plain washers. More commonly there's only 1 washer. In this case there were 2. Goes through on the shaft. Then we have our sprocket, which goes up that way, with the teeth down towards the centre line of the body. Then we have the roller, and then the shaft just carries on until it runs into the pocket at the bottom of the body. Now I've got to line up the screw holes in the shaft. So I'm rotating the shaft with my finger while I'm watching through the hole in the sprocket here. I can see the hole, there it is, that's lined up. And finding the small screws that went in there. See if I can get one in there and run in. Now my screwdriver's magnetic, so it's picking the thing out of the hole. Let's see if I can use that to my advantage. Sometimes you have to back the screw off and pick it up again so that it'll find the hole. Now that's too tight. Something's tight there. I may have one of those washers in upside down. One of them was slightly cupped, and I suspect it's cupped the wrong way. I've got it positioned the wrong way. Let's remove that. Remove the shaft, remove this, remove that. Remove my washers, have a look at them. Put it in so that it's cupped the other way. Put that back on. Put that on. line up the hole again, get the screw in. It may well be that actually it only needs one washer in that position too. As I said, it's unusual to see two washers there. That could have been an assembly error. Let's check that I reckon that's too tight. Oh no, that's okay, that feels okay. There's certainly no extra play in it. Just trying to judge from the feel of that whether that's too tight. It's certainly... No, that's okay. That'll do. So I've got to get the screw in the bottom one now. Much the same deal. It's wanting to tip over and right, let screw run down a bit and then find the hole it's got to lock into. That's it. That'll do nicely. Right, so we've got our gear in there, and at the top of the camera, so it starts getting messy. We've got levers and stuff to go on here, and remembering which one goes where is always a challenge. I think from memory this one goes there, this one goes there, which means, let's get my ratchet gears together and the spacers and so forth, and go under the advance knob. Where is the advance knob? The advance knob is here. Okay, so we start off with a plain disc. It goes on the film advance shaft there, and we have our two ratchets. The lower one, the teeth need to go. Well, that was good. See if I can do that again. Open up the front of the camera to make that a little bit more stable. Where were we? The lower one, the teeth needed to go this way. So that when this comes in, it will latch into those teeth. Then we have a plain disc. Then we have the other ratchet, which goes the other way up. Then we have this disc, and then we have the advance knob. And I'm just going to run that on there to pull all those discs into position, because they're all reluctant to seat. That do it for me. Looks like it. Okay, so let's check the action of that lever there. It seats in there, so one arm of the spring will run on that in that direction. That seats in there, yes. This now I'm short that washer. Here it is. And this spring hooks under here and acts on this arm at that point, pulling that into engagement there. That lever goes on there. I think I can just about put a screw through that at this stage. And that's the one I want. Very interesting. I've just noticed something odd about that lever. I'll have a explain again in a minute. Okay, so that sits on there, that moves freely, that one moves freely. If I do the screw up, they still move. That one doesn't want to move freely anymore. That lever's sitting down a bit at that end. What about that now? That's better. That one seems okay. The springs are seated correctly. That seems good. What else have we got here? We got this little lever. That goes on there. And one of two screws goes into that lever. Just check that they look much the same. They appear to. Just run that screw down there. That seems to be okay. And I can clean up and put the advance knob in position now, because I'm not having to do any more right at that end. So just get some naphtha, clean this advance knob. It's got a little bit of grease on it, it's got a little bit of grit on it. That'll do. Spin that down. That seems good. That gear, is that sitting there correctly? It appears to be. I'll put a bit of grease on that. Rub some on the underside surface and on the centre where it runs around the post. This little daisy wheel thing sits on there. This sits on top of it. and our frame counter goes on top of that again. I'll put a little wipe of synthetic grease on there. It can go on. Our frame counter disc is here, and give that a quick wipe. Yes, I certainly hadn't cleaned that because it was coming off green. You all know what that means. Right, come out of there, you. Well, I've lubricated that nicely now. I just dropped it in the grease pot. And the screw holds that. Get this lever in position. And there's a shoulder screw that holds that in place. And it will be this one. The lever that activates the frame counter is here. It's spring attached. Here does that sit? It doesn't sit like that. Oh, it goes underneath. Okay, get this positioned correctly. The spring has to hook on the underside of that lever. No, it doesn't want to go. See if I can get that spring to behave. Alright, let's do it another way. More than one way to skin a cat. Let's put the lever together first. Just playing a bit hard to get because it's a large screw with a very small thread at the end. It doesn't want to stand on its head. That's better. I'll just tighten that screw up. Bring the camera back into the picture. Hook that spring correctly into position on that post there, just like that. Swing this into position on its post. Put its retaining screw in place. Now every time I move it, you can see that the frame advances 1 notch. Have we got enough to check the film advance mechanism? I think we do. We revolve the film advance and I revolve the sprocket shaft at the same time. That's just locked. If I move this lever, it advances the frame counter, lifts this arm here out of engagement with the film advance, allowing you to wind on to the next shot, where in case this arm drops in. Move the frame counter one notch, frees up the advance, and so on. So the film advance is all working smoothly and correctly now. I'll check those screws. They all appear to be good. So mechanically, the camera is good to go. Still to do, clean the finder, put it back on, put the leather back on the base, put the depth of field calculator on there, and we're in business. So I better clean the finder. Now the finder is very simple, piece of glass at the front, piece of glass at the rear, and they're held in together in there with like a clip. You can take it apart, it's a bugger getting it back together again. I take it apart routinely if the glass is very, very dirty and I need to have it out to do a really thorough job of cleaning it. But if you can work like this and you get good enough access to those surfaces to get that glass clean, it's much to be preferred because it's fun getting those things back together otherwise. And there's no virtue in finding hard work when you don't need to. So clean those inside and outside surfaces. And you can check to see that if you've done a good job. You look through it and if it's nice and clear, that's a good start. And if you look at it and see if there are any obvious smears, and if there are, you need a bit more work. So do not be surprised if you need to go over things a couple of times until you've got them to your satisfaction. You're not coming back in again. This is a task that might only be done once or twice in a camera's lifetime. And a camera's lifetime can be longer than yours. That looks very good. So assembling this to the camera body, what have we got? There's a plate that goes on here, and this plate on top of it. They're held by two blackened screws. And they're only blackened to reduce the amount of reflected light inside the finder, annoying you and making the view through the finder a little bit hazy. Let's just give this a wipe, remove any grease or dirt. Now those two blackened screws are not particularly well blackened. I'm just going to touch them up with a pen, which will blacken them a little bit more. And here's the finder. Two screws, nickel plated I think. The prettier one should be where you can see it on the viewfinder, the rewind end side of the housing is typically the best place for that one. The other one is pretty much hidden. Now getting these screws in is often a hassle. It's hard to get good alignment with your screwdriver on those screws. I've got that screw started. The other one, yeah, it's just a bit tucked up under the advanced parts over here. but I think I can get to that well enough too. If I hold the reset lever across while I get that screw started. That seems to be okay. Let's see if I can get that screw in. It's going to go for me without a fight. Yes. Took a bit of work to get that screw to start correctly, but it did. Get the other screw done. Right, so that's the finder back on. The top cover. The top cover, there's not much to say about this. It's in reasonably good condition. There's a bit of corrosion around that top screw there, which can only mean that it got wet, and very likely to create corrosion at a point like that. Very likely somebody had their hands were wet with, you know, perhaps with salt water, something like that. And it created a spot of corrosion at that point. Now you might be tempted to put a touch of black paint over that to pretty it up. I'm certainly not doing anything of that here, because you start patching up paint on cameras, it's very difficult to know where to stop. There's always another point where the paint's not perfect. Just checking that the rewind works smoothly. It does. And the film advance locks correctly. The film advance is good. Shutter and lens, I've already decided they were good. That's all tidied up. And that brings me to the bottom of the camera. And then at the bottom of the camera, the next task is to put the leather back. So I'll give this a wipe over with some naphtha on a cotton bud. There's a distinct colour change there. Something happened at this point. Now, either something was spilt on there, perhaps somebody was retouching the, I don't know what would do that. But this pattern here was not a stain in the leather before the leather was put on the camera. It exists up here too. There's something a bit unusual about that. Got no idea what caused that, but I'm pretty confident it'll cause me no problems. There's our leather. So some adhesive is required. I have some here. The leather will probably soak it up like a sponge, because these are all exposed fibres on that leather. It's possibly enough, let's see. It's certainly enough to start with. So I'll spread out that adhesive, try and get a good even covering. That seems good. You can see it's not exactly wet on there. It's soaked in to a certain extent. We'll put this in place. The coverings usually shrink a bit, so don't be surprised if it doesn't push down easily over a boss like that. You usually have to push those down. Push the leather down around there to get it seated correctly. Well, that looks good. So now we're getting down to it. Here's our depth of field calculator. Take some synthetic grease, put it on the wavy washer which surrounds that little metal plate. Looking at the state of my dial here, that's a bit dirty. I'll just clean that. Significantly, that was not green grease. Which means that, oh yeah, it was, yeah, and I can see some colour to it. I thought different grease had been used at different stages in the assembly, but perhaps not. Just getting rid of that embedded dirt there. That goes on there. This dial. Just seeing what's dirt here and what's corrosion. It's not uncommon for there to be a bit of corrosion. The base of the camera often suffers from corrosion more commonly than the top sometimes, because cameras get put down on things. If somebody puts a camera down on a damp surface, it may not occur to them what they're doing, but it means that you often get corrosion on the bottom of the camera. Get that screw started. Get its mate started. Snug up those two screws. Now the nickel plating here is in great condition, and the text is crisp, no paint loss in there at all. That's a very good example. So there's my camera, and apart from a wipe over, that's it. It's ready to go home. The film advance is all working smoothly now. Shutter releases smoothly. Finder's clean. All that sticky green grease is gone. That's what was blocking everything up here. It effectively had stuck all the levers so that nothing was swinging across to engage with the ratchets, so that there was no stopping. The camera would not meter the film at all. This lever was sticky so it wouldn't return to its rest position, again because of the green grease. This camera, when it was new, would have had a release plunger here. The earlier cameras, the 117, the 118, this is the 119 of course, and the 126, which was the same as this camera except it had chrome features instead of nickel plated and black paint. Right, well I'm pleased to have this little one out of the way. It should have been a very simple job, and I suppose to a certain extent it was a simple job, but there was a bit to it, particularly when I had to take the time to make a special tool to remove the lens. But oh well, that's something that I'll be ahead now. Next time I strike one like that, I'll just be able to reach out and pick up the tool and the job will be done. Thanks for watching.